Hi, there's so many things going on right now in current events that it's hard to even keep track of some of them. But some things that I always think are important to cover in this class is things that are going on with trade and things, of course, that are related to the economy, because those are things that can impact us on a day-to-day basis. And so in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, it said that China regains top spot in trade with the United States. You see that there? And so I thought we'd talk for a few minutes about trade because other than, before COVID and before the protests that were taking place, we did have a lot going on with President Trump, and especially when he was running for office, saying that we needed to renegotiate trade with China, which, by the way, we did, and by the way, he did do that. And so things have sort of improved a little bit as far as trade goes with China, but I thought I'd explain a little bit more about it in detail so that you're more familiar with it. And probably you were surprised a little bit that China regained the #1 trading spot with the United States, because you're probably thinking, who was the #1 trading partner with the United States? And in actuality, it kind of bounces, flips-flops back and forth between Mexico and China. And so this just has some of the numbers on it. I know it's so hard to read this, but I'll read them off just so that you're close to it. This is from 2019, and this shows our trade between the United States and other foreign countries. And I'll go through these a little bit more in detail. But it does happen pretty regularly where it flips back and forth between Mexico and China. And when we're talking about trade, in this instance and most instances, we're talking about total trade. And so you'll see when I get through some of these numbers, like what the total trade looks like and why it's so important to take that into consideration. But then also, are we importing a lot more than we're exporting? And so that's what the numbers come down to in this. So again, this is 2019 numbers, and I know it's hard to see this, and I'm such a terrible writer with these things, but this is what we're exporting, and then this is what we're importing from these countries, okay? So it's showing that in 2019, we exported $256 billion in products to Mexico, and then we imported from Mexico $358 billion, which, by the way, is really robust trade. And I can tell you that a lot of this trade, especially between Mexico and Canada and the United States, really took over after we had NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which that was signed in the 90s. And then that's when trade really took over, especially because it made it so that products could move between those countries without any tariffs on them. And so then you could start building cars in Mexico using lower priced labor so that you could build the cars there and then sell them in the United States. Or you could build the parts in Canada, ship them all the way through the United States to Mexico, and then assemble the cars. And so there was a lot of things that turned it around for that. And by the way, helped all the economies, including the United States. But then the president in the last year or so did renegotiate that agreement, that NAFTA agreement, and changed it so that the terms are a little bit more favorable for the United States. And it was kind of interesting, like some of the things that were brought up and were like real sticking points for like Canada, for instance. They were trying to protect their dairy farmers, and so they weren't willing to allow the United States to have a lot of dairy products be shipped from the United States into Canada. And so that was one of the sticking points. And those sort of things do happen in that, where they're trying to protect certain industries. Again, in 2019, it shows we exported $292 billion to Canada, and we imported $319 billion. And so when you're talking about those billions of dollars, it's important. But take a look, that's really only about $25 billion shortfall. I got to fix something on my phone here. That's really only about $25 billion shortfall or difference between the trading. And so that's not bad. I mean, when you're talking about such a large number, that's a pretty small percentage, below 5%. Then the big one is in 2019, we exported $106 billion to China, but we only imported $452 billion. But we imported $452 billion from China. So huge difference in the trade there, right? And so there's this big trade gap between the United States and China. basically $340 billion, right? And so that means that we're bringing all these things in and we're not selling things to them. But we are selling things, right? Even $106 billion is a lot. And so like we sell them airplanes, we sell them iPhones, we sell them, other computer technologies, movies, things like that go over there, food products that go over there. And so we do sell them some things, and certainly those industries that are selling it don't want that to be hurt. And so you can imagine that those industries are trying to protect that. Certainly Apple is trying to protect their iPhone sales in China. But huge discrepancy. So President Trump sort of negotiated this new trade agreement, and I can tell you in the trade agreement from 2020 and 2021, China is supposed to buy an additional $200 billion in products from the United States. Primarily it's farm and oil products, and so for instance, soybean. China is now, according to this article that I read in the Wall Street Journal, now buying 30% of the soybeans from the United States. Huge number of soybeans, right? And so that helps the farmers in the United States. And I can tell you, while those negotiations were going on, the farmers were really concerned that China was going to stop buying soybeans, and then we were going to really have trouble. Another thing that they're going to plan on buying a lot more of is gas and natural gas. And so liquid natural gas, I had seen it's supposed to be about $50 billion that China's supposed to be buying from the United States in liquid natural gas. Now, I've been kind of surprised because natural gas prices keep falling, but they're supposedly going to keep buying, they're going to start buying more of it. Same time, I know we've had like the issues with crude oil, but the crude oil thing was just one of those things where it's unusual for something like that to happen because of the pandemic. The demand for it dropped so significantly. And then just for reference, I added a couple more here. Like for instance, China or Japan, we export 74 billion to them, and we import 143 billion, and that's in 2019 numbers. And then finally, one that is where we are on the advantage is with United Kingdom. We actually export 69 billion and import only 63 billion from them. And so in actuality, we're in an advantage there. And then of course there's Germany, which in South Korea, which also we import a lot more than we export to there. And so those are certainly things to take into consideration. Another component to this is what's going on with the value of their currency. And I'm going to send a link that's going to include this, and I'm also going to send a link for the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, so you can just take a look and see like what's going on with currency prices. And so right now, the euro dollar is at around 107, and so we pay $1.07 to get 1 euro. And so, that's sort of like have to pay a little bit more. And for the European Union, the cheaper it is, the better. Where if it goes down to 1 euro for $1, then we're going to have more buying power. We're going to buy more things over there. I'm going to talk more about currencies next week. And then if you take a look at like the RMB or the yuan from China, you basically get 7 RMB for $1 from the United States. So what does that mean for them? Well, we can buy a lot more because we could get 7 RMB with $1, and so it's a lot easier for us to buy products from them. Mexico is a great example. The yuan is at 20 yuan for $1, and so it's a lot more difficult for them to buy things from us because, imagine if you have to have 20 yuan just to get $1 worth of goods and services from the United States. So currency is really going to play a factor in this stuff too. But I will say, and I can separate all these issues out. I'm just talking about trade in general, and I can tell you that the things that President Trump has done, and I was surprised that it worked because I thought everybody's going to freak out across the world, has really improved the position as far as Americans' trade goes. Now, of course, whether or not that's helped us, with other areas where people think that the United States is trying to take advantage of them, that's a different story. But as far as trade goes, it's worked out pretty well. And then I did list here, that oil's trading at $38 a barrel. It used to be that the United States imported a lot of oil. Now we're a net exporter. And I think we had talked about this, that when you take a look at a barrel of oil, a barrel of oil has 42 gallons, and that's crude oil in it. So crude oil, and then that's going to be refined and changed into things like, regular gasoline or jet fuel or plastics or something like that. And so you're talking about $38 to buy 1 barrel of crude oil, which needs to be refined and cleaned up so they can be transferred into those things. So those are some of the things that I just wanted to talk about. Jot some of these things down, like normally I would include like how many gallons in a barrel of crude oil on our exam. I'll say something about who's our biggest trading partner, and then probably something about currencies too. So jot some of those things down so you're ready for the exam. Now I think what I'm going to do is try to come up with some sort of a test or some sort of a quiz, just so you know a little bit more about what you can expect on the midterm. You guys are doing great with things like discussion questions. You're doing great with your current events papers. Please keep those coming. And then also, thanks for responding to me about some of those questions that I asked, like, what concert would you want to go to and things like that. But it's also kind of fun just to find out where people are and what they're doing and things like that, since we can't really see each other or hear from each other. And so thanks for doing such a good job with that. And I'll check in with you later on this week.